Hey, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome. I am here with what may be the most late VR that I have ever done. My friend Wesley of 22 Zines, whose channel I will link below, made a video about punk and goth decks, and I think I probably commented, oh, this is great, I have to do a VR to it, and that was over 2 years ago. This is that VR. I'm going to stick to punk decks. I feel like I'm definitely more of a punk kind of person than a goth type of person, always have been, and I feel like that shows in my deck collection. Goth decks, I feel like I would only have a few. Punk decks I've amassed a good handful, and I'm going to show those here. I feel like I don't think I've ever played a show that started on time. I have attended very few shows that have started on time, and there's even one show that I still have a ticket for that never happened that theoretically could be rescheduled at any time that was due to occur, I think, over a decade ago at this point, but border crossing troubles prevented the band from arriving. So, punk is not known to be on time, I don't think. And I think that that's fine to VR so late. So, punk decks. The first one that I would like to show you is in this beautiful bright pink rainbow Kelly Bear pouch. Screams punk, right? This deck was the easiest pick in some ways because, it feels really obvious, I think. And that is, of course, the Next World Tarot by Christy C. Road. For folks who are not familiar with Christy C. Road, besides being a deck creator and an artist, Christy is also a musician who is in a punk band, or is and has been in punk bands. So I do think that this definitely fits the idea of a punk deck. In some ways, that for me is quite literal. There is definitely someone with a crass tattoo in this deck. There is imagery in this deck that really explicitly refers to punk culture, that refers to punk bands. More so than I think any of the other decks that I'm going to show in this video. This one, the tie-in as a punk deck feels the most literal. I don't know what's going on with all the reversals here. It is a deck that is definitely anarchic in its sensibility, that is overtly political, that is, a deck that is from an overtly anti-oppressive perspective, a deck that certainly thwarts certain tarot conventions in that way, with that intention. It is definitely a punk deck. There's also, I think there's a lot of kind of musical references in this deck in terms of kind of speakers and mixing and things like this. I feel like this one is fairly obvious in terms of the fashions and the influences. There's definitely some punk kind of tattoos and patches and t-shirts and things in this deck. I have no idea what I was doing, that sections of this deck are all reversed in a way that does not suggest that I was even shuffling with reversals, or just reversed for some reason. Okay. Not the point of the video, but Next World Tarot, definitely punk deck by Christy C. Road, a punk musician. The next one that I think in my collection would qualify as a punk deck to me is the sadly out of print Slow Holler Tarot. It came with a nice bandana, which I think adds something. DIY screen printing, punk, definitely, yes. I think that this one has a punk approach as well. I feel like the black, gold, red and white color palette has a definite punk sensibility to it. I feel like the way in which this is a collaborative deck that brings together a lot of disparate influences and kind of smashes together different styles and different artistic, perspectives and orientations into a whole that is a little bit cacophonous in the ways punk can be. Things in this deck don't really match, but I do think that they go and they make sense, though there are a lot of different elements here that are all put together in a way that one would not necessarily expect. It is a deck with really overtly liberatory politics. It is a deck that is definitely social justice oriented. It is a deck that invites experimenting in terms of the creator's approach to tarot that they outline in this little book. They start out their how to read the cards description. The only fixed rule is to follow your heart and encourage, kind of experimenting and figuring things out. They talk about specifically the name changes and the name changes in terms of the kind of card titles being from a perspective of addressing concepts from a point of view that challenges the frameworks of patriarchy and capitalism. And, I think that any punk that is worth listening to or worth engaging with does those things. I'm not going to pretend that, punk spaces are always unproblematic or that there isn't, sexist bullshit in punk spaces as there is everywhere else. There certainly is. But I think for me, punk spirit and punk ethos is certainly feminist, as I would articulate it, is anarchist, as I would articulate it, is social justice oriented in those ways. I don't think that the history of punk is that in any kind of consistent way, but I do think that different punk bands throughout that history, bands like Crass, for example, like going back to very early days, have articulated really overtly and confrontationally feminist and anti-capitalist politics in ways that I think that this deck does. I just also think aesthetically it feels like a punk deck to me. So, Slow Holler is a punk deck for sure. I'm making a big mess over here where all of the decks are. The next deck that I want to share as a punk deck is the Earth Mother Magic Tarot by Aishimira Yashin, an ecofeminist Rhizo tarot deck for queer women and femme people. This deck is amazing. And I only even knew about this deck because my friend Liz gifted me a deck by this creator that is the Majors Only deck, and I fell in love with it, and so when there was a full deck, I obviously went for it. This is a kind of deck that I could imagine being for sale at a table at a punk festival or at a show. This feels so punk rock spirit to me. This is a kind of deck as well that when I was a young person first going to shows and engaging in these kind of spaces, like if I had found this as a young person, this amazingly, you know, gender diverse, trans inclusive, feminist deck full of body diversity, you know, celebrating that. Like, I feel like my entire tarot trajectory would have been different. If there's a deck that I could wish that I had found as a younger person, I think this would be it. And the creator of this deck, I think, is quite young, or was quite young at the time this was created, and I just found that really inspiring. And it's something that made me really happy. This deck is totally DIY in its spirit and in its production. This is cut. Like, you can even see on the back in some of the places, you can see pencil at the edges where a ruler, you know, has presumably been used to make the line where the card should be cut. It is very hand done. It is so DIY in every way. The box is cardboard. You know, it's just awesome. Like, the fact that this deck exists makes me so happy. And the artwork feels like zine artwork. This is easily at home in, I think, the world of punk rock cultural production, like, broadly speaking. I could imagine this being album art, like cover art for a really cool feminist queer punk band. If Aisha Miri Yashin has not done that yet, you know, I'm sure that will happen at some point because the art is just perfect for that. I could see it being tattoo art potentially. It's quite intricate for that, but it does kind of have that vibe as well. This is so fucking cool. I love this deck so much. There is a particular sort of joy that comes with this deck for me. And I think it is very much in the DIY punk realm of things. That is what makes me so happy about that one. So that's the Earth Mother Magic Tarot by Aisha Miri Yashin. The next tarot deck that I will show is in this bag. This is a Peggy Papez bag that is a little bit too small for this deck. I think I might need to reorganize that a little bit. But this is a deck that is an out of print, previously mass market deck, that if I could see any mass market deck come back into mass market availability, I would pick this. This deck is fucking amazing. And that is Tarot of the Silicon Dawn. This, you know, the artwork I wouldn't necessarily say, like, the artwork doesn't scream punk to me. The artwork feels very much like a comic artist style. I think that the creator, Egypt Arnach, is a tarot comic book artist as well. It doesn't scream punk in the way that something like Next World does in terms of the depictions of the people and things like this. But this has such a punk attitude about it that I can't not include it. And a lot of that comes down to the book, which I think is, to date, one of the best tarot guidebooks I've ever encountered. I want this to be, you know, back in print, desperately. When I look for a queer deck or a queer tarot book, like, this is what I want. The attitude in this, I think, just is one that I really appreciate in certain ways. One paragraph that the author writes, describing tarot as a historical train wreck pulled by about 22 decontextualized images, a big pile of symbols that you shuffle and free associate over to try to connect with random factors. Whatever it meant to an Italian noble doesn't really matter anymore. It's a snowball of symbols rolling through history. Throw it against a wall and divine meaning from the shape of the splatters. There's something very audacious about this. It is simultaneously really informed by tarot traditions in terms of like Smith-Waite, for example, while also I shuffled in the title card. Why not? It is simultaneously informed by tarot traditions while also really just giving them the middle finger in ways that are really productive, that I really appreciate. The artist has included a lot of extra cards. There are a whole bunch of fools. There is an entire kind of shadow set of cards that are, I'll see if I can find one, like this spot gloss, kind of black on black spot gloss that's really cool. You know, it simultaneously stays in a tarot system in that there are discernible suits. You know, you can see here, for example, you can see that there are suit symbols on the corners of the cards, wands, swords, and so on. It does keep that structure, but also it fucks with it in ways that no other deck that I have encountered has done. In ways that make something that is very interesting and new. And I think the punk music is like that. In one of their books, I don't remember which book they were talking about, like, someone from Crass was talking about how, like, musically the structure of their music is fairly conventional in terms of having choruses and things like this, right? And a lot of punk is like that. It's not really necessarily way out there in terms of structure. It can be fairly, when you listen, it can actually be sometimes quite slow, quite controlled in terms of the music, and a structure that is fairly conventional, but the feel of it, the themes, it pushes a lot of boundaries, I think, at least when done well. I think, you know, punk can be and has been kind of recuperated like anything else. And I don't assume that every kind of band that is positioned as punk in terms of a genre or style is therefore inherently radical in any particular way, because that is definitely not the case. But the punk that I am interested in, that I would say is you know, punk in terms of spirit and not just sound conventions, right? I can relate to this deck, giving a big fuck you to what's expected. It's a very queer deck. It is a overtly sexual deck in a lot of ways. It is playful. It doesn't take itself too seriously. Like, it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it is, I think, doing something very intentional. And it's doing something that I'm very interested in. And I think that it's queer and it's radical and it's punk in its own way. And I would love to see this deck back in print. There are parts of me that are like, how the fuck? How did this get published in 2011? Because I think as a queer deck, like, I think that this actually does things that are a lot more interesting and a lot more, I don't know what I want to say, queerer in the political sense than a lot of other things that I'm seeing that are produced now. And this is dated 2011. I would love to see this back. I think it's amazing. I just happened upon my copy, and I'm so happy that I did because it's so good. Another punk deck, I would say, is Tarot Souverain. and it's by Emmanuel Fontaine. And this is, as it says, a non-binary eco-feminist tarot deck, and it is in French. The book is only in French. This is definitely a Cthulhu Tarot made me do it situation. This is, to me, very much a punk deck. Again, it's an eco-feminist deck. It's a deck that is particularly focused on or concerned with food and food sovereignty, food justice, in ways that I think are interesting. I've got majors on the top. I've got majors on the top because I was filming Riots Not Diets. I was filming the top tarot trumps, and this deck comes up in a few of those. This is definitely a punk deck. It's a very overtly anti-capitalist deck. It's a very overtly feminist deck. It's an overtly anti-colonial deck. It is one that, again, stays in tarot conventions in terms of the suits and the majors. Like, it is very much a tarot deck. Not an oracle deck, for example, but it does do a lot of renaming. It is not traditional in terms of its imagery at all. Here for 8 of Earth or 8 of Pentacles, we have a bunch of books, for example. The Ace of Cups. And the suits are renamed elements. There's a lot of animals here. This deck is just really cool, but the rebels in the courts, definitely feeling punk activist style deck. There's a lot of gender diverse and queer liberation kind of imagery in this deck as well. There's a lot of protest kind of themes in this deck in terms of slogans and signs and acts of resistance depicted in this deck, which I think I can connect to punk rock, at least the punk rock that I care about. And I think the artwork, like, style-wise, feels very punk. It feels like a very DIY, very hand-done, very scissors and paper kind of style of an artwork. It's not kind of shiny and polished. It feels like a person made this, you know. The deck itself is clearly printed by like a printing, it's not like Earth Mother Magic where it's been hand cut out, but the artwork feels like that. There's overtly anarchist imagery. Child of Water. This is a cool one. This is a really cool one. And I feel like it embodies this like particular sort of feminist punk spirit for sure. And it makes me think of like Food Not Bombs and these kinds of food justice type actions that, you know, many of us who've been in punk community and anarchist community will be very familiar with. It definitely has that kind of orientation to it. So that's Le Tarot Souverain. Last tarot deck I want to show. It's a black and white one. And then I have two oracle decks to show. The last tarot deck that I will show is the Many Queens by Letty Jane Rannekamp, which I also think definitely has a punk sensibility. Like, oh, horizontal and vertical cards in the same deck. Why the fuck not? Weren't expecting that, were you? I think that this is a really good one. This is a deck that for me, in terms of how I work with it, is one that I find really amenable to body-related, body image-related, that kind of self-care. This is a deck that is very good for that. These definitely feel like really punk rock kind of characters to me. There's lots of tattoos in this deck. There's lots of body hair in this deck. There's lots of unconventional attire in this deck, outfits that are thrown together from a bunch of different elements in ways that, you know, punk style does. There is definitely a deliberate intention in the construction of this deck that the creator has spoken to about kind of challenging normative beauty standards and fashion standards and gender norms, for sure. It is a deck that does those things, I think, and does those things really well. This is a deck that I can imagine like reading for punk friends with. You know, it feels inclusive and inviting. There's some fishnets happening there. Definitely punk adjacent, for sure. It's one that I can, you know, I can see somebody reading with this at like a punk event, and it would feel very like it belonged there. I love this. This is one of my favorite Two of Swords. I really, really like that a lot. There's a fair amount of nudity, and like nudity without shame, which I also really like and appreciate in this deck. I think this deck is fantastic and definitely has a punk vibe. I think the black and white even adds to that. It's very kind of graphic, you know, in terms of some kind of graphic style. There's a lot of punk bands that have this kind of, not the eye, too many eyes for me. There are a lot of punk bands that I feel like have this kind of really graphic black and white album art style though. And so this could also remind me of that. Next up, I have two oracles that I would count as punk decks. And the first one is another black and white deck, also another French deck. This is L'Oracle des Vieilles Dames, the Oracle of Old Ladies. And this is another very DIY one. This one comes in a couple of different variants, and you can get this in a more like hand cut version. I went for the printed one instead of the more kind of papery one, just because I was worried about durability. It was shipping a long distance to me. So the Oracle of Old Ladies, this deck is so this deck is so fucking charming and fun and enjoyable. And it is a deck full of old ladies who are frequently naked, who are witches, who are fearless, who are hairy and bald and wrinkly and just living it up in ways that I think is amazing. I feel like this has this very kind of what is the word? Maybe like ostentatious, audacious. This has kind of an audacity to it, you know, a particular sort of feminist elder audacity that has a punk spirit to me. I think that this deck is so good. I think that the artwork again is very hand done. It's very DIY, very cool. Definitely would be at home in a zine. Definitely would be at home as album art. Like, I know folks who've recorded punk albums on cassette tapes who have kind of style like this in terms of the cover art and that. I think this deck is great. And it's very limited. In terms of the kind of print runs that the creator does or has done. I'm not sure what the publication status of this is. Like, look at how good this is. But mine was, I don't know if it will focus, but mine was the second edition, copy number 4 of 12. These are really small run, really DIY decks. not mass produced. The fundamental opposite of mass produced. And I think that, again, all the punk that is interesting is the absolute opposite of mass produced pop shit. So this deck, definitely a punk deck in that sense. In a super small print run, probably printed at your friend's house kind of a way. And I love that. The last deck that I will show is another Oracle deck that I think is a punk deck in spirit. And that is the Living Altar, an Oracle and spell deck for the Radical Witch. This has to be the physically largest deck that I own. I have there's moon phase cards, and I have those out separate because I've been using them in the context of doing moon phase readings. This is another one that I just think embodies a kind of punk spirit in a lot of different ways. So it's fucking huge. Like, my hands are not small. I could get, this is a standard tarot size, just for comparison. This is a standard tarot size, and this Oracle doesn't even fit in this camera. There we go. It is huge. It is huge. This is another one that I think just aesthetically, all the black and red and white definitely has a punk vibe to it. It is very DIY feeling. I've got it kind of sorted right now into different sections. This feels like a punk rock altar space to me. I love this deck so much. It is really overtly oriented towards social justice and liberation and anti-oppression and sovereignty, self-sovereignty. This deck is brilliant. This deck is brilliant. I love the medium that this is in. Or kind of layering of mediums and layering of things, and I feel like the stitching, there's bits that are stitching that looks like maybe paint, but there's definitely bits that are kind of made of thread, and to me bring up this kind of sewing patches onto a jacket kind of vibe, which I'm definitely all about. It has a sense of like deliberate but haphazard at the same time. Like deliberate and also not overly structured, intentional, but also a little bit chaotic, a little bit messy, in the best possible way. This kind of layers and layers of things, and it's a collaboration between a couple of artists as well. I just think that this is amazing, and it is very much it's very much a punk deck to me. I love the colors, and it's like each card has a kind of, in some ways, like a limited color palette, but then when like throughout the deck, it's not a limited color palette. There's a lot of variety. This deck is so good. This deck is so good. This deck is so good. And definitely punk in spirit. And it has these spell cards that don't have any titles or anything on them, to tell you how to interpret them, but they're just capturing these different, it's like snake skin and plant materials, and like capturing these kind of ephemeral moments of magic in a way that feels really interesting to me. And the guidebook is very overtly focused on community care, is focused on uplifting marginalized voices. they write in the guidebook, magic that isn't centered in liberation for all is just a ritualization of domination, oppression, and capitulation. It goes there. It goes there in ways that lots of others do not, I think. And I just think that that's really cool. And so Living Altar, definitely, I think aesthetically, in terms of its spirit, in terms of its politic, in terms of the media that the creators use, definitely, feels like a punk deck to me. That's all my punk decks. Thank you, Wesley, for making this deck to VR to, and making this video to VR to, this video to VR to. I've been meaning to VR to this for 2 years. And amidst a bit of a YouTubing slump, here I am. This is what has, been one of the things that has gotten me near the camera again, because I love it so much. Thank you for watching. I will see you all again soon.